Hello. Good morning, everyone. Hi, my name's Kiernan Ironfields. I'm a Darug man. My people come from Western Sydney. I've been living on Wurundjeri country for about 6 years now. I call it home. It's a beautiful place. I wanted to begin by acknowledging the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation as the custodians of the land that we're meeting on today. Pay my respects to their elders past and present. I also want to acknowledge the Yolngu people of Northeast Arnhem Land, the keepers of the Yidaki, and pay my respects to them. I'm a Masters of Economics student at Melbourne Uni at the moment. I also spend quite a bit of time playing Yidaki. It has an incredible impact on my life, and I feel very privileged to be able to share that.
got some experts in the room. The GradAustralia team and I are stoked that you guys are all here to listen very carefully to our panel this morning, led by Steph. So I'd like to pass over to Steph to run us through. Thank you very much.
My name is Stephen Bramble. I'm a facilitator who works in many different communities. I work in corporate Australia, I work in graduate programs. I've been really blessed that for the past 10 years I've been working within Indigenous communities across Australia, working in the education and employability space. I am here today because of my wonderful friend Richard Hurst, who works with Indigenous Accounting Australia, who I've had the privilege of being able to work with him in some of his events. I'm really excited to be here. I want to get us kicked off and get ready for our panel. I'm going to let our panel introduce themselves later. It's getting to the point, but while you're making your way up to the stage, I want to get a bit of audience participation happening. So I am not an Indigenous person. I am an Italian Australian, and my dad's English, but I look nothing like my English father, and I was raised by my Italian family, so I'm an Italian Australian. My family settled in Richmond, and the veggie patch fed our family. So I'm really passionate about acknowledging country and what this country has done for my family. That's part of the reason why I work in the space that I work in. As a non-Indigenous person, I've been really blessed to learn a lot about Indigenous culture, and one of the most important things I think is learning that people, from my culture, from Western culture, we tend to be a little bit, we get down to business so quickly, and we forget that the people that we're talking to are actually people. So in order to get us going on that, I want us to think about the stories that are all in this room. So we're really lucky to be here today. We're really lucky that all these people are in the room today getting ready to share their stories with each other. So before we kick off, I want you to turn to someone next to you, a new person that you can find that you haven't met yet, and I want you to have this conversation. Who in your ancestry inspires you to be a better person? So who in your ancestry inspires you to be a better person? And I'm going to say that you are allowed to designate ancestor to mean anything. An ancestor could be a friend, it could be a child, it could be a teacher. I'm going to let you make that as broad as you want to, but who in your ancestry, who in your history inspires you to be a better person? Yeah? I'm going to let you have that little conversation for a while. I'm going to warn you when you're halfway through. I'm going to warn you when there's 30 seconds left. And then we're going to kick off the rest of our meeting, because I want all of us to recognise that everyone in this room is not just a meat bag with a mouth hole that makes sound noise, that we are all people with backgrounds and stories and pasts. Yeah? Is everyone ready to do it? Great. Go for it. So just a quick show of hands. Who has been to an event and you've seen someone do this at the start of the event? Before we begin, we'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands we meet on, pay our respects to the elders past, present and future. And now we go on to this other thing, yeah? Who's had that experience, yeah? I found that experience really problematic when I was a younger man. And one of the things was I never understood what it was that we were doing. And I had a great man from Tamworth, a guy called Mark Sutherland, who helped me understand that what we do when we acknowledge is that we acknowledge that we're about to start something. We're about to do some business together. And the best way to do that is actually to acknowledge the place where we are and all the stories that come with all of us. Because a person is a collection of narratives. Right now, you got to do a thing with a person where now you know something about them. You know their values, you know who is in their life, you know what's important to them through one little conversation. And it means that the business and the work that gets done is better. So I'm going to say some words now. I really want, what I want us to do now is take your imagination into the first floor of this building, take your imagination into the ground floor, take your imagination into the car park, take your imagination into the dirt that's under the car park. For 65 to 125,000 years, there have been people meeting on this land, figuring out how to help their young people learn and grow and develop. And that's been going on for the longest continuous culture in the world. We are really lucky to be able to continue that tradition today on this land and all those stories. I want to acknowledge all the Indigenous people in the room and all of their ancestors and their stories that they bring with them. I want to acknowledge all of my fellow migrants to this country and all of the stories that we bring with us. And I want to acknowledge that every one of you has important people with you that has meant that you can be in this building today, and that you are a collection of people going back to the beginning of time, and we are all so fortunate to be here at, what's the date today? The 2nd of November 2018 at, what's the time? 9:15, and this time will never happen again, yeah? Now, from this place, this is where we can start doing work with each other, yeah? Just as my last little bit to get a bit of audience participation, all of you right now, I want, on the count of 3, I want you to call out the name of the person you spoke about, yeah? So I'm going to count to 3, and then there'll be a whole bunch of noise. If you guys didn't speak because we were talking about getting up on stage without falling over, you can think of someone now. So a person who you want to acknowledge on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Fantastic. I could hear about every one of them, and I'm going to ask you about all of them individually later. So we need to get started, and we need to get our friends up on stage to introduce themselves. I figure the best thing is if we just go down the line and we introduce who we are, why we're here today, what our background is, anything that you choose to talk about. Bearing in mind that what we are going to discuss is the point of our discussion today is going to be how can industry engage with the Indigenous, how can industry and graduate programs engage with the Indigenous community in a meaningful way.
I'd just like to start by acknowledging country and pay my respects and acknowledge the traditional custodians, the Bunurong of the Kulin Nation, and all their elders past and present, and the emerging leaders of tomorrow, and all the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in the room today as well for this event. My name's Linky Aoye, traditionally born and raised in Turrbal Yagara, and ancestries Biali, Gurang Gurang and Darabal. So I'm not even going to tell you where that is just yet, so we'll work that through. And I'm with the ACU, the Australian Catholic University, as a coordinator of the Indigenous Higher Education Unit, Jimboyu, which means to learn to teach in Woiwurrung language. Thanks.
I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners, Bunurong people, and their young people, their elders, past and present, emerging. My name's Richard Hurst. I'm a Gamilaroi man on my dad's side. My mum is from Ecuador, South America. And what I do is I work on Indigenous Accountants Australia, which is a joint initiative. It's really good because it's an industry-led initiative, like of the peak bodies of accounting, Chartered Accountants Australia, New Zealand, and CPA Australia, to encourage participation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders into the accounting profession. So my background is I did university a bit late, and I find that's pretty a common thing with our people, and not the usual pathway. And I went to the federal government, and one of my grad friends is here today with me, and it's like we picked up where we left off. She's still in Canberra. I made it out of there. But yeah, I guess I've been working in this area for a few years now. I co-founded an Aboriginal health initiative earlier this year, and it's still kicking along. I'm not involved, but it's to do with addressing some of our issues, which is to do with life expectancy, health, chronic disease, and getting fit and active, which we can all benefit from. So it's led me to do a master's program at Melbourne Uni, which also Keenan has done, which is the Murray Indigenous Business Masterclass. And just looking forward to sharing with you guys what my experience is and working in this wonderful area.
Thank you. I too would like to acknowledge the land that I'm on and the elders that have walked this earth before me to give me the opportunity to be here today. There's been a lot of very strong shoulders for me to be able to get where I am. I would also like to acknowledge Brother Link and my heritage, which is South Sea Islander, which is another slave trade that brought Aboriginal families and the Islander families together also. I work at Swinburne University. I'm the manager of the Indigenous Student Success and Engagement team within the Mundani Toomadal Centre. Mundani Toomadal means embracing learning. My family grew up in Midjingbul of the Bundjalung Nation. I'm new to Victoria, and I guess you'll figure out a little bit more a bit later on, but I'm really excited to be here and perhaps give you some perspectives around the needs and wants of Indigenous students that are going through higher ed and at PAVE level.
Hi, I'm Kiernan. I'm a current Masters of Economics student at Melbourne Uni. Previously, I worked at the Indigenous Student Unit, Marat Barak, at Melbourne Uni. And I've worked in Indigenous university student recruitment and graduate recruitment before. Here just kind of to share my perspective as a current student.
We are going to get a chance to pass the mic around, but I just want to hear some of we're going to make a list, yeah? So does someone want to shout out a question that they really think is a good question to be asking?
So how does the industry support students to complete their courses? Because a lot of the research is showing us that they don't complete at the same rate as non-Indigenous students at the moment. So what can we do to support them to finalise their degrees?
What can we... Oh, great. Straight into it. I'm going to...
Money. Each university has their own advancement unit that actually looks for donors. And one of the things that I find the hardest to do to keep students on, and you've all been students, you're all graduates, you know what a poor student life is like. But what we want to be able to do is provide scholarships, and we live in Victoria where there's a game called Marlbrook that gets played for most of the year, and we've got students who are elite athletes looking for somewhere to move to find accommodation, and I don't have accommodation scholarships to offer. So if I've got money, I can actually give them what they need. We're still, living on the handout of the federal government based on our student numbers. Swinburne has a really nice online presence, but you've got to be working full time to be able to complete your degree. And I don't know about you, but I like a glass of wine and a bit of cheese at night, and not a not a textbook. But it's essential. We all do what we need to do the things that we need to do. But if I could ease the burden of students in terms of just being able to focus and study, that would be my magic wand.
Oh, there's still...
Just to add to that, just quickly,
But I'll get to you.
I would say you need money that's not tied to many things. So there's no point in setting up a scholarship for a commerce student who's in second year who's got an average above 70. Because you're going to take like the 100 students and cut it down to one. There needs to be money that's for Indigenous students who are doing an undergrad degree or a postgrad degree, whatever time of the degree they're in. Just because otherwise, what can seem like a really good idea to the corporate, which is set up a scholarship for a commerce student in that final part of the degree because you want to graduate, you're just not going to be able to find anyone.
I've got a question to lead off from that. We have 4 scholarships that aren't tied to anything, and we really struggle to get applicants every year. We had a little bit more success this year, but that took hours and hours of legwork of me going around to all the different universities and speaking directly to the students and just letting them know how uncomplicated the process was. But we still don't get a very large number of applications. So how do we attract students and how do we encourage them to apply for these scholarships that we have?
An interesting one that we've had is that we had a chartered accountants. We had a benevolent fund, low SES and necessitors. I don't even know that word. You know what I mean. Now, an interesting thing is that we took that and out-branded it to be an Indigenous scholarship with artwork in a flyer form, online presence, and I gave away the first 2 in Perth 2 weeks ago. It's the long haul. Like I've known and supported one of the students. He lives in Perth, but he was at Melbourne Uni. So I think it's really relationship based, and I go across from I look after half the country with the support of both organisations. So I think the way you do that is have champions, you know, within organisations to help you, because the thing I run out of is time, but it's really important just to raise awareness, and I guess it's really relationship based. Like, I've got a relationship with all the unis. That's why I can rope amazing people in to join me on this panel. But I think it's an email and a quick flick. We love face to face. There's no doubt about it.
Maybe if there's one scholarship opportunity, double it, make it 2, so you get a second 4 in a row. Well, I think I won't answer that then. You've answered it. Now, the scenario is just that when you've got Indigenous students who are looking at the same scholarship, sometimes they step back because they think somebody to the left or right of them is actually more worthy of the scholarship opportunity for themselves. It's a community. It's not a competitive field. It's not set up in that context. Traditionally, our mobs are not into the competitive nature. It's more about the community and everybody walks together and nobody's left behind type mentality. That's essentially what traditions have taught us. So yeah, if it's a couple of them in one, it means that you've got a greater chance to have a number of those who may feel as though they're not as worthy as the next person, but they realise there's more than one opportunity. So you're obviously doing that. Yeah, come talk to ACU, maybe have a yarn.
I have a question. So I work for an institution. Hi, Keenan. I work at the University of Melbourne. So one of the, I guess, I'm interested in raising here, because we had a chat in our conversation about how to collectively make opportunities culturally safe. So I think that's one of the barriers that we've found for students, aside from funds, aside from support and connection, is the question around whether or not an organisation they might be moving into is culturally safe or culturally supported. And so I think I'd be keen to open up to you to share with the room perhaps what that might look like for students, so we can all move towards that as well.
I think it's, cultural awareness is one thing. Valuing that is a completely different thing, because you can be aware, but if you don't give it value, if you don't give it a place, and you don't, well then, that's the next challenge. And I guess it's tying into, how do these community systems work, And I think it's kind of, I mean, you got a workplace culture, right? If you don't think that a lot of the thing is cultural fit, This is another thing altogether. We've been, we've only, like, in the last 40 years started to go into uni, getting degrees, and we do have a completion there. There's, and what it's not what I've found. What studies have shown is, financial difficulties, 1, obligation to family and community, 2, and just kind of access to support. So, I mean, when you have a culturally aware and valued and safe place, you'll be able to develop and retain your employees and get maximum out of them. And it's not about, like, diversity. It's about it is about inclusion. And we want to have a deadly career. Like, we love to have options and impact and be. We know the interesting thing is that role models are so important, because you can't be what you can't see, and I hear that all the time within the Aboriginal community. So I think showing that someone can stick it out, that's having a culture, like having an opportunity that's not just an entry level, aiming high and trying to get into that management position is the goal and the dream, and people want to aspire to that. They see, oh wow, that guy can do it, that girl can do it, so can I.
I think what Richard said is really important, but I think we've also got to remember it's a two-way street, cultural safety. And I think one of the things that needs to be considered is that it's a conversation that all of your staff should be having, knowing that you're getting Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander graduates to your workplace, and providing them with the opportunity and the permission to be able to tell you what it looks like for them. What is their perspective on your workplace? How can they talk to you about it? How can you talk amongst your workforce about what it is that they don't know? We're sitting up here in front of the room allowing you to ask us lots of questions. The same thing should apply on a daily basis in your workforce, is that you should be having these conversations, unpacking what you don't know. Don't be afraid to ask the questions. Every good learning experience comes from a bit of a conversation and a bit of unpacking, and being the naive inquirer, I think, is, and in a respectful way, of course, allowing everybody to be a part of the conversation is an important first step, and realising that it is a two-way street for both Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and for you guys as well.
Hi, Mel from QBE. That's my day job, but outside of work I have really strong connections and work in the community in Redfern. So Steph, when you talked about the power of relationships, that really resonated with me. So I get it personally about some of the things that you can do, but going back into my workplace, I know money's really important, but what are some other tangible things that organisations can do that are meaningful, not just for that one student, but for the community that, you know, where we operate or work?
Fill it up full of Indigenous people. Get more and more people in there. The more people that are in there, the better it is, I've found from my experience.
I would also suggest that you get to know who your Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander units are within the universities close by to you. Who are the relationships you have already with your universities? Who are the Aboriginal staff? What are they doing? Do they have enough tutors to work with the students to help them understand their content? We have a very small budget that comes from the federal government. It's called the Indigenous Student Success Program. 100 years ago, it used to be called the Aboriginal Tutorial Assistance Program. They've now blended everyone together again and call us Indigenous Tutorial Assistants. We need people to be accessible, even if it's on phone, Skype or Zoom, so that students have got people with graduate qualifications that can help them understand and unpack their work. We at Swinburne use our learning assistants and academic development advisors, but then we have the luxury of a little bit of money left in our budgets to do one-on-one tutoring. Not everyone gets that, because once the money's gone, the money's gone. What we would like to be able to see, and you know, something I'm looking at doing, is an emerging leaders program where we actually get volunteers and peer-to-peer learning. But then you all know what it's like to be a student. It's, you know, when you're volunteering, it's a nice thing to do, but sometimes we all need to eat. But understanding, if I had people coming to me that were in the workforce and saying, what can we do to help? I have got a list of things that I could give jobs to people to be able to help Indigenous students, and it could only be a few hours a week. I think that there is a place to have the conversation about what are the other things that we could do on a volunteer basis to assist our students, that then would promote scholarship offerings, that then would build bridges about your workforce. I think there's a lot of pre-work that could come from those relationships with your Indigenous student units. Link?
I reckon a lot of things, but sorry, Leanne. Just thinking of the cultural employability within the organisation. So you're probably looking at the engagement of having everything that was talked about here in relation to your relationships with local stakeholders in the areas, filling your organisation with Indigenous people, that there's a real presence, because our mobs, and like a lot of mobs, we're attracted to one another. So if there's a mob in there, we'll go to those places. The Aboriginal flags, the Torres Strait Islander flags, these are beacons, these are signals, these are identifiers for our mobs to say that's something going on there related to my people. So I'm going to go and check it out. I'm going to go to a workplace where they have a strong Indigenous employment strategy, or they have one starting up with. They've got these things called wraps. I mean, I'm not going to talk about wraps just yet. Wraps, a bit of chicken roll and all that sort of stuff. I'm not going to talk about wraps at the moment. But with relation to employability, it's about understanding the community's needs as well, because you might have to be flexible in relation to how you set up the actual employment of an Indigenous trainee, cadet or an actual employee in relation to their obligations to their community. Sorry business, ceremony, going away to remote area communities or regional rural communities, the uptake that individuals have and their obligations to their communities is very strong. It's very heavy, it's very taxing, and it needs to be considered in your organisations. Things like annual leave, sick leave, all that sort of stuff exists, but you've got to have other things like sorry business. People have got to go away to sorry business. They've got to go interstate. They've got to go to a remote area. They've got to be away for some time. 1 week won't be enough. You've got to consider it's got to be more than a week. People might have to go to a remote area community, stay on site for long periods of time. New South Wales is such a state that it does have remote area communities and regional rural. And then they're coming back to Redfern, which is considered metro urban settings. So you've got 3 layers of context to consider. Metro and urban, rural and regional, remote and outer remote. And they mean what they mean. Outer remote means outer remote, which means it's a fair way from anything, and it's a fair way from communication and the opportunity for those individuals to interact in the urban settings. It's quite a challenge. Physically, spiritually, and also related to the communication. Maybe they're coming from a language. They've got 2 or 3 different languages, remote area communities, 4 languages in some cases, before English. So the considerations around these, you have to unpack all this component. When you're meeting these individuals, you're meeting them and you're learning about their own personal situations, but their connection to community and their traditions, obligations, responsibilities. And how do you incorporate that into your workplace component? The word accommodation comes up, but it's not really about accommodating that. It's more because the accommodation component can lead to aspects of staff members a bit resentful that other Indigenous peoples get to stay away for long periods of time. But they have to go away to a community to do very important ancient traditions in some cases. In the urban settings, the metro settings, we've got clashes of cultures. So we have Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples having to immerse themselves into everybody else's culture in the urban metro setting. They leave their houses and they're immersed in a whole range of cultures that are not their own. Remote area communities and outer remote, they're more immersed in their own cultures, traditions, and tens of thousands of years old. But it's very different when you come closer to the cities. Regional and rural, there's elements of that. But then you get into the cities and the big towns. So it's the understanding of where people are actually transitioning into. Hope that makes sense to some degree.
A big thing that I've heard in this is that this cannot be the end of the discussion. It has to be so ingrained and brought into everything, and the discussion needs to keep going. And I've heard you say twice, Leanne, to know the people around. So you're being made offers of people in the community. And I think that thing that really stuck with me is when you said the Aboriginal flag is like a magnet. Is that what you said, Link? Like it's a symbol.
It's like the bat signal.
Yeah.
The bat, it's up there.
Yeah.
Black signal, but it's
yeah.
up, you know.
And what that says to me is that this stuff needs to be fully ingrained, because my experience of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community is they can very quickly tell whether it's something you really live and walk or whether it is a surface thing. And that's why having a short discussion is really hard, because this needs to be the pea in the bed that makes the princess go and find out more information. That is the worst metaphor that I just pulled out of nowhere. I'm really aware that we had another question, but we are right on time. I think in terms of just closing off, it would be nice just to hear if anyone has any final thoughts up here, just before we close off the session that we're having.
In closing, I think that I would encourage you to get in contact with your universities and your university placement areas and seek out the Aboriginal staff and ask them how, what and where can you get access to the students. Most of them have got lounges where they hang out and make coffee, and if you want to get to know the students, I would suggest that you put on some food and go and meet the students. One of the things the first thing I did when I moved into this position was put a lounge and a fridge and some food and a microwave, and now people use the space because it's somewhere for them to go, like the flag. But it's about the relationship building. It's all about engagement, and once you understand, the conversations then can happen from there. And by all means, get our details, and I'm certainly happy to take phone calls.
Can I just add to that? Would you also agree with me that slow down? Like, slow down, take the process slower. Like, there's no need to be selling the thing when people walk in the door. Like, actually just hang out a bit longer.
That's exactly right. Get to know who the people are. Yep. Ask them what they need.
Adding to that, be prepared to wait. Be prepared, be patient. And if it's a sustainable model, you will be prepared. You will expect that things will not happen immediately. They'll take some time. That relationship building is crucial, takes probably the most amount of time, but it's the most important amount of time you need to engage with. Yep.
I think what's really important is also just, university is one thing, but just remember that most Aboriginal people aren't at uni, and they are working to provide for their families and communities. And knowing what a career could be like after tertiary, well, that's why you can demonstrate. We need role models. They don't have to be Aboriginal. We're inspired by your stories too. So I think that it's in my field of work. Like, we're at the professional level, but what I always say is that, I'm always building a business case, and my business case is arguing and influencing the right people to say, hey, listen, let's start at schools. Let's start at young people. Let's start with families. Let's start with people that are upskilling or reskilling or thinking about changing careers altogether. So, yeah, it's got to start before uni as well.
It's not just a business challenge that we're all here today. Like, we're everywhere that we go, everything is Indigenous land here on this continent, and it's an obligation to figure out solutions for these things.
Be creative. Look for the jobs that you can offer right now where you can place the training around them. But create the job, build the scaffold, have the graduates within your workforce as well is another option for you to consider.
Was that useful for you? Did you enjoy that experience of hearing these words? I strongly encourage you to continue this now. Go back to your organisations, have this discussion, find out people in the community and be part of the community. It is one of the most welcoming, open communities that I've ever experienced, and I'm Italian, so find out more.